You're listening to This is Yoga Therapy. I'm your host, Michelle Lawrence, and I've had the opportunity to interview many of those who are making a difference at the intersections of yoga and health. And I'm here to share with you their stories and conversations. Thanks for listening. In today's episode, I interviewed Dr. Marc Halpern. Dr. Halpern is the founder of the California College of Ayurveda and a classically trained Shivananda yoga teacher. He's been studying and practicing Ayurveda for more than 30 years. An expert in the field, he's written 5 textbooks, as well as the popular book, Healing Your Life, Lessons on the Path of Ayurveda. He has also authored the best-selling recording, Yoga Nidra and Self-Healing. Dr. Halpern has received awards for his service to Ayurveda both in the United States and in India. When he's not teaching at the college, he's engaged in research and is a frequent speaker at ashrams and conferences worldwide. As valuable as research and writing may be, Dr. Halpern teaches that practice is even more important. And of course, we're going to get to that at the very end of our podcast today. Recently, he just published a textbook entitled Classical Yoga Therapy, The Integration of Yoga and Ayurveda. And we'll talk about that and more on the podcast today. It's so great to reconnect with you and have you here today, Marc.
Thank you, Michelle. It's really a joy to be with you today and also to have the opportunity to reach out to your community and to connect with your community. You've done such beautiful work in the field of yoga therapy. Your work with Inner Peace has been, I think, really groundbreaking, and I consider you to be one of the pioneers of yoga therapy here in the United States. So it's truly a joy to be here with you today. Thank you.
Oh, what a nice honor, Marc. And, we've known each other for some time. We were just catching up a little bit before this podcast, but it's been a few years since we've been in touch. And I was really excited to hear about the publication of your new yoga therapy textbook. And we'll get to that in its specifics more in a moment. But I wondered if you could just share a little bit about yourself to our listeners, for those who may not know you, although I imagine many of them do. Your own healing journey is what brought you to the work that you do today. And so can you give us just a little snapshot, a brief version of that story and how it led you to healing and the study, application, and teachings of yoga and Ayurveda?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Healing myself has really been an important part of my journey toward healing others. I don't think we can really appreciate the journey that our patients or our clients are on unless we are also engaged in that journey ourselves. For me, it's been an incredible part of my life. I think I can trace it all the way back to being a young child and recognizing that the people in my community, which was my family, were generally unhappy. And I saw that unhappiness in them, and I thought to myself, gosh, there has to be more to life than what I'm observing. People who are unhappy, people who are complaining. They were complaining about their physical well-being. They were complaining about their emotional well-being. And I just knew that there had to be more to life than that. And I kept my eyes open for that. And my journey ever since then was really about trying to find both health and happiness. I think this is not uncommon for so many people. As I've traveled around the world for the last 35 years, 40 years, I've come to realize that there's 2 things that people want in life, really more than anything else. They want to be healthy and they want to be happy. And they're on a journey, if they're sick, to be healthy, and they're on a journey to be happier, to be more content. And I think everybody shares that journey. And for me, I started out meeting a teacher at the age of 16 who became my first guide. And he was an unlikely teacher. He was a chiropractor. And he inspired me that I could be healthier and that I could be happier through chiropractic. And I saw him and I witnessed him, and he was an extraordinary person. And I was inspired, and I decided that I would also become a chiropractor because of him. I went to chiropractic school. I was studying and learning and very excited about that work. But toward the end of my studies, just before I graduated, I became very, very sick. I developed a disease which at that time was very difficult to understand and very difficult to diagnose. It left me completely bedridden. My liver wasn't working properly. My spleen became enlarged. My blood became severely anemic. I had severe arthritis in the joints of my body. I had rashes all over my body, and I began to lose weight rapidly. I went to all the best specialists you could go to at Stanford University, and immunologists, rheumatologists had every test run on me, and they really couldn't figure out what was causing me to be going through this. But they decided that I should be hospitalized and put on various medications in order to see if we could control what was happening. For me, that was a real crossroad in my life. I had to make a decision whether to go into the hospital or go on a journey to heal myself. And I decided to go on a journey to see if I could heal myself. In hindsight now, we believe we understand what it was that was causing my condition. At the time, we didn't know if it was an autoimmune disease or if it was a very new disease. That was really one of the first cases in California, which was Lyme disease. And at this time, it's very obvious, it's very apparent that what I was suffering from was Lyme disease. I had been bitten by a tick a couple of weeks before my symptoms began. And that combined with the stresses I was facing in my life probably caused my immune system to react in the way that it did. And it left me crippled and bedridden. And I began a journey to heal myself. I decided not to go in the hospital. I felt that if I went in the hospital, I wasn't going to come out. This story intersects with my spiritual journey. And my spiritual journey led me to understand that for me, all the diplomas on the wall weren't going to matter. It was really a journey about healing myself. And that if I could heal myself, then I would be able to help others to heal. And I came to know through my experience of being sick that it didn't matter. It didn't matter at that moment whether I lived or died. Either way, I was going to be all right. If I lived, that would be great. I'd be able to help support other people. If I died living that truth that I was experiencing, I also felt that I would be all right. I really, in that state, was in a state of, that was, well, the best way to describe it really is that I was close to God. And I felt from my relationship with God, with the divine, that even if I died, everything was going to be fine. This was a journey about learning, and it didn't matter whether I lived or died. So I went on that journey to heal myself, and that journey is ultimately what led me to the field of medicine, of Ayurvedic medicine. It's ultimately also what led me to yoga. And it was through Ayurveda and through yoga, and specifically Yoga Nidra, that I was able to heal myself. I was able to transform my body, transform my mind, and transform my physiology. When I changed my physiology, then my body and mind were able to heal. This was a 7-year journey for me of fully healing from that condition. But now when I look back on that journey, I consider it to be, and that illness, I consider it to be the best, worst experience of my life, because it was really horrible to go through. And yet I couldn't get to where I am today and who I am today without having gone through the pain and the suffering that guided me to make the transformations that I needed to make in my body, in my mind, in my lifestyle, in my outlook on life. And so I'm actually deeply grateful today for the experience that I went through. And while that was an incredible journey that I went on for 7 years, healing myself and rebuilding my body, rebuilding my mind, there have been many, many additional journeys, little micro journeys relative to that along the way that have created additional suffering. And I've come to learn that that suffering exists for our continued growth, for our continued evolution. And it's a reflection for us. And we have the opportunity, if we choose to look at the situation that is causing the suffering, understand our part in it, and then make the changes internally in order to shift the experience. And this is really, really a compatible, I guess you could say, or adjacent to the philosophy of Vedanta, where we come to understand that the world we experience, or we could just say our experience of the world, is a reflection of what's going on inside of us. So if I'm experiencing suffering, that's a reflection of something inside myself, and therefore the journey of healing is an inside job. It's an inner journey to find the source of the suffering. And when we make that internal transformation, then we see that transformation in our experience. And that can be healing from, in this case, Lyme disease, or it could be healing from heart disease. It could be healing from cancer, from Parkinson's disease. And over the years, of course, through my work at the California College of Ayurveda, through my work as a practitioner, I have supported individuals on this journey, countless individuals on this journey. And it's a sacred journey, I believe, that each person walks. And it is the most important journey that we walk, because it is really the healing of our body, the healing of our mind, and the healing of consciousness. And this is the journey that we all walk together.
I love your story, Marc, and it's been so long since I've been with you to hear it again, and yet it kind of brings forward in me so many resonant truths, right? Like the way that you describe your experience, it's certainly different than mine, but it just resonates on such a deep level. And I love that you use the word healing repeatedly, because I understand from what you shared there that even if you were not cured of your situation and you didn't make it out of the hospital and this life was over for you at the time, you still had a really profound healing experience, which is different than curing, right?
You know, I think that's really important for people to understand, because ultimately, at the end, we're all going to die. And we're not going to cure every condition that we have, because this physical body, this physical experience is transient, and we come to understand that in yoga. And we also understand it just as human beings. We don't necessarily want to face that, but we do understand that we're not going to be able to hold this body together forever. And so the real work in this life is, while we are here in this body, to learn as much as we can about who we are, and to go on a journey really to remember our true nature beyond this body and beyond this mind that is eternal. And it's from remembering our true self, or our true nature, that really all of our healing takes place. But there's quite a few obstacles that are in the way that we face. And managing those obstacles, facing those obstacles, we get caught up in it. And we lose ourself, and we lose our higher self in the process of managing all of the obstacles. And so what I love about the journey of yoga and the journey of Ayurveda is it's really about coming back to our center, coming back to ourself. And when we do, the obstacles that appear so large in our lives begin to shrink. And when they shrink, they become smaller and fewer. Shakti, or energy, flows more freely, and we're able to be of greater service in the world, and we're able to express that divine energy through us in more beautiful ways. And this too is the path of yoga and the path of Ayurveda.
Yeah, so well said, so well put. Let's dive into your recent book here next. So you've been known for some time now as a pioneer, really, of Ayurveda in the West, and you've trained thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, I'm not sure, of students here in the United States through the California College of Ayurveda. And maybe you've got a lot of international students too, because I know your school is virtual and hybrid. I'm curious, why did you choose to write a textbook at this time on classical yoga therapy? Why was it important for you to share this information, to have a book, a textbook entitled Classical Yoga Therapy now?
You know, that's a really good question. And I think it's one that where the answer could evolve within me over time. And the reason I say that is because when I sit down to write, I often don't decide what it is I'm going to write. What I decide is that I have an opening in my life right now to write, and then I allow myself as best as I can to be a vehicle for that creative energy, that divine energy, to move through me. And sometimes I'm just as interested in what I'm going to write as the readers are. In other words, I don't know what I'm going to write until I actually sit down and write it. So I sat down originally with the space to write a manual, if you will, for a course that I teach, Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy, a course that I teach. And it quickly turned out to be much more than that. Again, it's one of those things where you sit down and you say, well, why am I doing this? It's because I have no choice. It's because I have no choice. My journey in yoga began 40 years ago, or nearly 40 years ago. And my journey led me to the Shivananda yoga community, which is a traditional classical lineage of yoga therapy. And in many ways, I was adopted by that community early on for my Ayurvedic knowledge. And through our relationship, the world of Ayurveda and the world of yoga, for me, merged together and became one journey to understand the complete journey of the body, the mind, and consciousness. You probably have heard this saying before, that Ayurveda and yoga are like two sides of a coin, inseparable. The path of Ayurveda inevitably leads to yoga. The path of yoga inevitably leads to Ayurveda. You can also say that Ayurveda is the healing side of yoga, and yoga is the spiritual side of Ayurveda. So for me, over the last 40 years, there really hasn't been a difference between Ayurveda and yoga. It's really been about my dharma, which has been to support the healing of body, healing of mind, healing of consciousness. And in my own journey, I've never separated the two. It's also been important to me through my journey to delineate what is classical from what is modern, because I think that's very important as a academician, as a teacher, it's just really important for me on my dharma to be able to do that. I want my students to understand what is classical, what is a new interpretation. I think professionals need to be able to discern and understand the difference. So
let's get that out, because I think, to me too, language and naming, and it was really purposefully entitled Classical Yoga Therapy. Like, that was what struck me when I saw your book. So what do you mean by that term? What I see in your book is that you've coined or said that modern yoga therapy blends yoga with an understanding of Western physiology and psychology, right? But tell me in your own words right now, because those were your words too in your book, but what do we mean by classical yoga therapy, and how is that different from modern yoga therapy?
Well, that's a very important question, because many people look at the word classical and mean different things by it. Some people think of classical as historical. Some people think of classical as, it comes from a legitimate lineage. But what does classical really mean, or what did it mean to me as I was writing this book? If you look at the body of knowledge that is yoga, one way to look at it is that there is what is considered the pre-classical period of yoga, the classical period of yoga, and the post-classical period of yoga. And those three periods of yoga are what I decided to focus on: pre-classical, classical, and post-classical. And post-classical then begins to flow into modern yoga. So there are these delineations, and let's talk about that a little bit more. If we start with the pre-classical yoga, it takes us back really to the Bhagavad Gita. So the Bhagavad Gita is the body of knowledge about yoga from the pre-classical period. Now, that then flows into the classical period, which is basically a period around 500 or so BCE. The Gita was about 1000 BCE. There are scholars who differ on the ages, but the Gita is the pre-classical. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are really the classical period of yoga. And so it built on, in many ways, the knowledge already present in the Bhagavad Gita. And then from there, we have the post-classical period. And the post-classical period is where we saw the development of Hatha Yoga. So Hatha Yoga is a relatively recent development because it's from the post-classical era. And that post-classical era starts really at its earliest around 700 AD, but really was fully blossoming in the Middle Ages between 1000 and around 1600 AD. And so that's the post-classical period. And then if we talk about modern, we're talking about today. We're talking about 20th and 21st century knowledge, maybe even 19th century knowledge. But before that was the post-classical period. And that's when most of the Hatha Yoga texts were written. So I decided to focus from the Bhagavad Gita through the texts of Hatha Yoga and then to merge them together. There are 6 texts that I utilized in writing this book: the Bhagavad Gita, the Yoga Sutras, Garaksha Samhita, the Hatha Yoga Pradipaka, the Shiva Samhita, and the Gerinda Samhita. And these are the texts I chose to focus on. These are the 6 most important texts of yoga. They are certainly not the only texts of yoga, but they are the 6 most important texts of yoga. And again, they are the preeminent texts of the pre-classical, classical, and post-classical period of the yoga body of knowledge. And as I sat down to write this, and it really, as I sat down to even consider this, it became apparent to me that there had never been a book like this written that integrated these 6 texts together, and especially from a academic perspective. And when I say an academic perspective, what I mean is, as a textbook, everything that I write, or at least as much as I could write, is tied directly back through references to these classical texts. So there's more than 1,000 references in the book specifically to certain sutras and shlokas in these various textbooks, so that the reader can see that this isn't my opinion. This is what it says in the texts. And for each text, I use 3 different versions, because even a translation of a version can vary by the author. So part of the journey was to identify the differences in the translation, try to understand why by going into the Sanskrit, and then to filter it through my own understanding to communicate it. And that was the process of writing classical yoga therapy. And I think it's important because we too often don't know, people involved in the field of yoga therapy, they don't know, well, is this true because my teacher said so? Is this true because their teacher said so? Is this true 1,000 years ago? And where did this idea come from? And that's what I tried to address in this book. So this book is what it is. It is the 6 most important classical yoga texts merged into one textbook written from a healing perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, even though I gathered that from reading through your book this week, like just how you explained the process and really pointed to those periods in this like 10-minute explanation is super helpful. And I do think that you've coalesced these periods and these main texts in a way that I haven't seen before either. And I think it's a great textbook and guidebook for the modern yoga therapist too, right? I mean, it's so important to know where we come from. So beyond the title of the book, which was the first thing that really piqued my interest, as I started going through it, I noticed very quickly in your introductory part that you included a section on yoga and the disagreements between teachers. And I just felt like, yay, he named something that happens, right? And then you offered a little bit of information about that. I guess I want to know why you wanted to include that here. To me, that's so important to bring in a variety of perspectives and lineages and to know that you're going to find disagreements and disconnects here and there. Why did you put this part right in the introduction of the book, Marc?
I think I did that because we live in a society that unfortunately experiences a lot of separation, a lot of disunity, where individuals have different ideas and different perspectives and think that their idea or perspective is the right perspective and therefore somebody else is wrong. And you can get really fundamentalist about just about any idea or belief and think that there's only one way to articulate things, one way to say things, one way to understand things. And yoga is really about unity. It's about oneness. It's about wholeness. And in understanding yoga, you have to explore the idea of there being more than one way to understand something or to communicate it. And I see it in the yoga community as well as I see it outside the yoga community, that there are different, obviously, opinions, and people can get really upset or really intense about some of those opinions. So it's important to understand where they come from, and to allow the space for that does not mean that it is denying an idea, to allow the space for another idea. So I'm going to say that again. To allow the space for an alternative idea does not deny the idea that you have. And so let's explore that just a little bit. So in yoga is a philosophy. It's one of the 6 Shadarshana. The Shadarshana are the ways of seeing truth. So it's interesting to begin with that there are 6 different philosophies, 6 ways of seeing truth. And yoga is one of those. Vedanta is another. Nyaya, Sankhya, Vaisheshika, and Mimamsa. These are 6 different philosophical systems that have their roots in India. Now, these 6 philosophical systems that have their roots in India, if you imagine 6 plants underground, their roots are all intertwined. And so they borrow from each other, build on each other, but yet they all still have their own perspectives. Then along comes a teacher. And there have been many, many wonderful teachers. And those teachers study this body of knowledge that is the Shadarshana and the writings that come out of each of these traditions. And based on their understanding of these different philosophical systems, they begin to merge them together in a way in which they can articulate what they experience as truth. And this is the nature of the guru. The nature of the guru is to understand this body of knowledge and be able to communicate it in a manner that's going to be meaningful for the student who receives it. Now, the teacher is also utilizing not just the body of knowledge that has been written, but their own insights into that knowledge based on their own development. Because only in accordance with one's clarity on the inside can one understand this body of knowledge. I think that's one of the unique things about yoga is it's not just textual knowledge. What it is textual knowledge that is then experienced inside, we could say within the heart, and then communicated to the students. So depending upon the heart of the teacher, the clarity of the mind, of the heart, then that teacher is able to communicate that knowledge. Now, all of this leads to differences because one teacher may pick more from Sankhya, one may pick more from Vedanta, one may pick more from yoga. But every teacher, every guru that you've ever come into contact with, traditionally from India, has picked parts and language in order to communicate that. Now, that's one of the reasons why we have differences. That then gets passed down from teacher to student, teacher to student, teacher to student. And this is built into the way in which Sanatana Dharma, which is Hinduism, is meant to be. It is not meant to be a rigid body of knowledge. What it is meant to be is a body of knowledge that is understood within the heart and then communicated. It is not meant to just quote texts like to say, oh, well, the the Bhagavad Gita says this and the Yoga Sutras say that. It's actually meant to be digested and then meant to be lived and meant to be communicated. And there's going to be differences in the way people digest it, the way people live it, and the way people communicate it. So there is the knowledge, there is the source of the knowledge, the depth of the knowledge of the teacher. How deep does the teacher go? There's the mixing of different philosophical traditions called the Shadarshana, and there's personal insights. And they're going to be a little bit different amongst different teachers. There's also the extended body of knowledge, and there's no teachers that know it all, that know every text that has ever been written. But you have the texts of Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Laya Yoga, Mantra Yoga. You have all of these in addition to Hatha Yoga, and teachers will pick from them the parts that they want to communicate. Now, even amongst those texts, even if you understood all of those texts, you still have to recognize that they're written in a language that is in code. I like that idea that Sanskrit is a language that is in code. It's a code language because every letter is symbolic. Every sound is symbolic. Every word and sound has to be taken within an appropriate context. So a single word can be translated in many ways. A simple sutra can be translated in many ways. And that's why we see that 3 different translations of the Shiva Samhita can come up with 3 different interpretations of a shloka. And scholars do not always agree. Even the finest Sanskrit scholars do not always agree. So when I wrote this book, I took 3 versions of each of the texts, 3 versions of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, Shiva Samhita, Geranda Samhita, the Bhagavad Gita, Yoga Sutras, etc. 3 versions of each of them, identified what the differences were in translation, then went into the Sanskrit myself, and then based on my own ability, my own insights, was able to then communicate that. And so this is why there are disagreements between teachers. And a disagreement between teachers does not have to lead to conflict. We take disagreement too often in our society and turn it into conflict, whereas disagreement can actually broaden understanding. And that is what I think, if there's a message that I would want to put out there today, because we live in a time and in an age right now where there's so much disagreement leading to conflict, is we can embrace disagreement and utilize it to broaden our understanding. And in broadening our understanding, we find deeper unity. And unity is what yoga is all about.
Yeah. What a beautiful explanation, and now really so obvious, right? Why there's disagreement, and yet getting back to the unity that is meant from yoga as the sort of outcome of those broadenings of understandings, I think is a perfect way to sort of wrap that together. And I hope it piques people's interest to check out your book, what you've shared here today, because for me, that's just it's so helpful to hear really what you brought together, your approach in writing it, and your understanding of the teachings and where they came from. I think hopefully will inspire our listeners to check it out and include it amongst their studies for yoga therapy. So I'm going to ask one last question. I always end the podcast this way. And it has to do with your own practices. So as you probably know, in our training programs at Inner Peace Yoga Therapy, we teach our students who are studying to become yoga therapists that really one of the key pillars of doing the work of a yoga therapist is to first have your own steady daily practice. And it sets the foundation and comes before doing any work with others. So would you mind telling us? I'm curious, what do your daily practices look like?
Yeah, that's really an evolutionary question. And I say evolutionary because my practices have evolved over time. When I was younger, I would say that my practices and my life were separate from each other. That my practices were like an island away from my life that I hoped would enhance my life. And now my practices and my life are far more integrated. And so what do I mean by that? I mean that my sadhana today, my practices today, my path, if you will, sadhana would be your path to the divine. My sadhana today is living yoga in every moment. This is the most important sadhana. It is bringing jnana yoga to life. It is reflecting on the knowledge of what is real and what is not real, and not getting caught up in the unreal. It's bhakti yoga in life. It is when I'm experiencing, it's another way to say this is an aspect of swadhyaya, this self-examination. When I'm living in the world, if I'm experiencing anything other than peace of mind, I have the opportunity to reflect on myself. Swadhyaya means to meditate on the self and utilize that as a way of discerning the difference between that which is divine and eternal and that which is this limited experience of getting caught up in the drama. So if I'm experiencing any anxiety or any sadness or any depression or any anger, I've lost my connection. So through bhakti, yoga, through faith, I come to recognize that the universe is unfolding perfectly. And we can say that that's really an aspect of my sadhana, is reminding myself all the time the universe is unfolding perfectly and I'm a part of that unfolding. Another aspect of it is non-judgment. It is to recognize that this moment is neither good nor bad. And that's true of all the moments. So it's true when there's struggle, and there's true when everything is going smoothly and we feel more celebratory. That it's neither good to have everything going well and be celebrating, nor bad when everything is not going well and we're struggling. And if we can let go of the judgment and just be present with each experience, this is a part of the sadhana. This is what non-judgment is really all about. The goal is to create equanimity of mind, where the emotional roller coaster does not have the same highs and the same lows. So to have a mind that is at peace requires the faith to know that the universe is unfolding perfectly, and the non-judgment to be able to look clearly at this moment. And finally, the non-attachment, to not hold on so tightly to anything, to anything, whether it's an idea, whether it's a thing, whether it is the most important thing in the world to you, which for most people is either the people they love or the money they have or the power they have. We get attached to all of those things, and all of those things ultimately bring about suffering, because once we're attached to them, then we are in fear that we are going to lose them. And that fear brings up all kinds of emotions and all kinds of disturbances that are disharmonious. So it's really trying to live in faith, live in non-judgment, live in non-attachment. And the practices that we typically think of in yoga are there really only to support being able to experience faith, non-judgment, and non-attachment. So my practices of yoga nidra, or my practices of meditation, or my practices of asana and pranayama, these are beautiful practices, but they only exist to allow me to reset myself internally so that I can have deeper faith, be more non-judgmental, be more non-attached. And that allows me then to be of greater service. And that's the karma yoga, so that I can serve without attachment, serve without judgment, and serve with the faith to know that everything is unfolding perfectly. This is really my sadhana today at this stage of my life. is to live the knowledge and to observe how that knowledge is affecting me in any moment. And that's not to leave your audience with the impression, by the way, that I am always in a state of faith, non-attachment and non-judgment. Not by any means, but that at this point in my journey, it is about witnessing myself. It is about observing my state of equanimity and my state of balance all the time, and noticing when I'm off balance. And when I'm off balance, taking that responsibility and reflecting on, where is my faith right now? Where is my judgment right now? Where are my attachments right now? And how are they getting in the way? And using that struggle to grow, which brings us right back to where we began, how much our struggles are really a part of our growing process. And when we recognize that and we engage it through yoga, we're living yoga in the world.
So beautiful, Marc. I really loved everything that you shared today, being in conversation with you again. Thank you so much.
It's truly a joy to be with you and to have this sacred time with you, Michelle. And again, the work that you're doing right now with Inner Peace Yoga Therapy is so beautiful and so important. And I wish you the greatest success.
Thank you. If you'd like to learn more about who we are and what we do, visit us at innerpeaceyogatherapy.com.